Okay, there we go.
It's like, I really don't want, it's my stuff. You can sit here if you want to. Yeah. Is this your mic?
Yes.
Yeah.
Could I have the stuff underneath you, though, ma'am? Can I have what's underneath you?
How you doing? Here you go. Pretty good. Good evening and welcome to the culminating event of the Interfaith Week activities. I'm Carrie McMillan. I'm a psychology student here at Marshall University. I'm a senior. I'm graduating in about 4 weeks. And my participation in this week's activities is my psychology capstone. So thank you so much for all being here. My partners in organizing this program are Maggie Capehart. She's a senior engineering major and director of events for the Secular Student Alliance. Dina Deshawn, a little wave, senior pre-med biology major and vice president of the Muslim Student Association. And Kimberly Renee, a junior in the Regents of Bachelor Arts program and president of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. And my faculty capstone advisor, Dr. Pamela Mulder, professor of psychology. The purpose of this panel is to promote tolerance and togetherness through cultural awareness and understanding. By reaching out to those with faiths and beliefs that perhaps seem bizarre or unusual to our normal routine, we can cultivate relationships with students and community members and foster an environment of acceptance rather than disapproval, judgment, or even hate. We have a panel of esteemed guests here to speak to you tonight representing 8 separate belief systems. And it's my hope that with this new knowledge, you will have the comfort and courage to open your hearts and your minds to new conversations, new business collaborations, and perhaps even new friendships that you might not have considered before because a man, woman, or child belonged to a group or category of other that you didn't or couldn't understand before tonight. Keeping that in mind, we want to engage tonight in civil discourse, a peaceful conversation. The panelists will speak for about 5 minutes on the main tenets of their topic, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. But let me properly introduce our guests because they're overqualified. This is going to take just a moment, but bear with me, we're going to get to the good stuff. Joining us this evening to speak on both topics of Buddhism and Hinduism is our chairperson of religious studies, Dr. Jeffrey Roof. Yes, please give him an applause. Dr. Roof came to Marshall University in 2002. Although he is broadly trained in comparative religions, many of the courses he teaches specifically explore religions and philosophies of Asia. He completed graduate work in religious studies and Asian studies at the University of North Carolina, Duke University, Missouri State University, and earned his PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara. His specific areas of research include Hindu and Buddhist yoga and Tantra, Zen Buddhism, methods and theories in the study of religions, and healing and wellness in traditional religions. His most recent publication was on the neuroscientific approaches to Buddhism and Hindu meditation traditions. Before coming to Marshall, he lived in India and Nepal, where he studied yoga and Sanskrit and many of the living religions of those countries. Also joining us is Tom Scar, is here to present information on his faith of Judaism. Mr. Scar is a practicing attorney with the law firm of Jenkins Fenstermaker and is both a member of the Reformed Temple in Charleston and the Benai Shalom Temple in Huntington, West Virginia. He is former president of the temple here in Huntington, and he's also formerly served on the board of both temples as well. You might be interested to know that Mr. Scar is married to a Catholic wife, the ceremony of which was presided over by a priest in an interfaith ceremony. They have 3 sons, all bar mitzvahed, and he has a personal interest in interfaith studies and has participated in several panels at Marshall and other institutions. Welcome, Tom Scar. On the topic of Christianity, Dr. Larry Bailey joins us from the Department of Religious Studies here at Marshall University as well. He began training for ministry, taking classes through his denomination, the Free Methodist Church, beginning in 1995. In 2002, he earned his bachelor's in both church ministry and biblical studies from Warner College, now Warner University, Warner Southern College. In 2004, he earned an MA degree in Christian ministry with a double core focus, biblical studies and congregational care counseling from Asbury Theological Seminary. His PhD work was in human services, counseling studies, helps him better serve his congregation and his community needs. Welcome, Dr. Bailey. Also joining us is Dr. Majed Cotter, the director of Marshall University's Morrow Library. He joined Marshall University in the fall of 1989 and holds a bachelor's degree in Arabic language and literature, an MS, post-MS certificate, and PhD in library and information studies. Dr. Cotter is very active professionally. Since joining Marshall, he has been speaking, presenting, and publishing frequently on professional subjects and topics of interest at various local, state, regional, and national organizations, institutions, meetings, conferences, and other professional events. His main areas of specialty are librarianship, Islamic studies, and the Middle East. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Cotter. Some water here. I think I'm speaking more than they are. Shirin Majidi joins us today to speak on her faith of Baha'i. Shirin graduated from the University of Maryland in 2014 with a bachelor's degree in neurobiology and physiology and minors in international development and conflict management and religious studies. She's in her third year of medical school here at Marshall. Shirin was born and raised as a Baha'i and currently serves as the assistant to the Auxiliary Board for Protection to the Appalachian States. She is also actively involved in the Baha'i-inspired community development programs happening here in Huntington. Additionally, she spent 1 year, from 2014 to 2015, as a Homefront Pioneer Service volunteer for the Baha'i Faith in Parkersburg, West Virginia. Thank you for joining us, Shirin. Dr. Marty Laubach joins us to speak on the topic of Unitarian Universalism as a member of the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans. Dr. Laubach is professor and chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. His research is on the workplace and on the social psychology of spiritual experiences and on the American Neopagan movement. He is on the board of the Center for Sermon Studies and just last week gave a presentation titled The Functional Equivalent of Sermons, Workshops at Pagan Festivals. He will be teaching a class next semester on the sociology of religion, both through the sociology program and the religious studies program, where his class will explore what religion is, how we do it, and what it does for us. Thank you very much, Dr. Laubach, for being here. And finally, here to speak on the topic of secularism is Dr. Herman Mays, Assistant Professor of Genetics in the Department of Biological Sciences here at Marshall University. He earned his PhD in evolutionary ecology from the University of Kentucky in 2001. Dr. Mays is also the current recipient of the Hedrick Teaching Fellowship for this academic year at Marshall University's Center for Teaching and Learning. Dr. Mays has been invited to speak publicly numerous times on the topic of evolutionary biology, and I noticed on his website, monophilia.org, he was invited to participate as a speaker at the inaugural TEDx Cincinnati event in 2010. Welcome, Dr. Mays. Thank you. So we have very accomplished speakers here tonight. Free knowledge, it's wonderful. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Ruth to go ahead and begin.
All right. Hey, can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me? Everybody hear me? Okay. Who's my timekeeper?
I can be your timekeeper.
Yeah.
I'll sit right here in front.
Wave me down. Give me the 3.5 minute mark.
Okay.
First off, I'm not a Hindu, so although tonight my comments, I'm going to try to make them in such a way that if you were a Hindu, you'd think I was. In an academic environment, sometimes I'm talking outside of traditions, and other times I'm talking from the inside of traditions. And so, for this circumstance, I want to try to talk about the tradition from the inside. But then, at about that 0.5 minute mark, I want to say some things about that from the outside. And that is, Hinduism is a collection of religious traditions that originate in South Asia. So that's India, Nepal, and broadly construed the surrounding areas that go very far even into Southeast Asia, all the way to, say, Bali. And so there's no collection of tenets that you could list, because we'd still be here tomorrow, because it's too many different religions. And they're actually all gathered together simply because they're not any other religions. That's right. It's like the religions of South Asia that aren't Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, or or some other labeled tradition, but they do hold a certain amount of things in common, and some of them all of you will recognize because they've gone global, and that is they have ideas about karma and reincarnation, and that the world or the cosmos has a sort of order that's collected under the concept of dharma. And so they share all of those kinds of things. But I guess the most important thing I wanted to say is that for Hinduism, because there's no single set of tenets, you can be an atheist and be a Hindu. You can be a polytheist and believe in millions of gods and be a Hindu, or you can be a monotheist and believe it's all just one God, or you can believe in a kind of neutral, non-personal, like the Star Wars Force, really. That's what it's like. Sort of supernatural something. And all of that be Hindu. And so in asking about like core tenets, it strikes me is the most important thing to say about Hinduism is there's no set of collected tenets. But for Hindus, you have to get the actions right. So it's not about orthodoxy. It's not about your doctrine and having that correctly shaped. It's about your practice, and you have to get that right. And so you have to do things in order to be a Hindu. And so I made a list of the things that you have to do to be a Hindu, and maybe that will answer the question, and that is you have to have some sense that ultimately you're looking for some kind of liberation that frees you from what we understand as existence. And that's collected under the terms nirvana and moksha and mukti and a bunch of others, but sort of some kind of ultimate freedom that disconnects you from the universe as we know it. That's one thing that holds a lot of this together. Another idea is yoga, and that is that word, its connotation is any kind of discipline. So you could say, what's your religion? And a Hindu would say, I practice the yoga of Shiva, or I practice the yoga of this or that or the other. And so they use that as my particular discipline is this. But the denotation of that word is unification, or union, or unitary. And it's both internal and external. So yoga is the stuff you use to integrate yourself, to make all the mixed up pieces that don't go together properly. And it's also the external word for doing that with the whole universe. So you get yourself right with yourself and the cosmos. And then the other sort of couple of ideas that would, or concepts that would go with sort of all Hindu practice is that you have to give and you have to receive. So what you give is your love and devotion to whatever. If you're an atheist, it's to your practice or to study. If you're a theist, then it's to God. And then what do you get back from that? You get this word prasada, which means something like the cosmic stuff that makes you free. And so in English, that's often translated as grace, and there's some appropriate parallels that you'll find in Western theological concepts. But I much better like the sap, or it's like the tree sap. It's like the juice that makes you free. And so by engaging in worship and ritual and practice and discipline and mental exercises and study, you sort of free up this energy that's the kind of energy that frees you from your confusion, your delusion, the ways in which you're trapped by your own confused behavior. How's my time? Where are we?
Got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay.
Now.
And so the very last thing is, I hope that one way or another, almost everybody here tonight is going to have some take on human beings. Almost always, at least as long as we have any kind of written history and then some archaeological history, have basically two questions, and that is, what is a human being? And why should I get out of bed in the morning? And the Hindu answer for that is a human being is a kind of broken deity that has to discover that about itself. And in discovering that, you find out why to get out of bed.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And now we get to hear Dr. Ruth speak on Buddhism.
Oh, I'm going twice in a row?
Yes, yes. We love the Hinduism so much.
Man, I should have come earlier.
Yes, you're in trouble for being late.
Buddhism is, in terms of geographic spread, is the world's third largest religion. And it's close to that in the numbers as well. Although Hinduism is competitive numbers-wise because there's such an enormous population in South Asia. But geographic spread, Buddhism is really third. And there's a bunch of different kinds of Buddhism. All of it is held together by basically two concepts. That if you're Buddhist, you're going to have these two concepts somewhere in your to-do list for the day and for your life. And that is to be mindful or to pay attention. So mindfulness, that's the first concept. And the word for that, right smarana, means remember. Its literal meaning means remember who you are and remember what's important. In English, that almost always gets translated as mindfulness or be mindful. And the additional concepts that go with that is wake up and pay attention. Pay attention to what you're doing right now. Don't worry so much about yesterday and don't worry so much about tomorrow, but pay attention to what you're doing right now. Another piece of it is how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you phone in cleaning the toilet or washing your coffee cups, the idea is you will end up phoning in your humanity. If you only pay attention to what you think the most important things are, then you're going to be mistaken because you don't know what the most important things are because humans are idiots. So you have to be mindful and pay attention and not make up your mind ahead of time and try to do everything with the sort of same level of commitment, because only through that will you discover what the most important thing is. Because the ideas you might have in your head given to you by your culture will not tell you what the most important thing is. Only by paying attention and not making your mind up and sort of being very carefully clear about things will you know. That's the first concept. The second concept, which holds all forms of Buddhism together, is don't harm yourself or others. And that is broadly construed, emotionally, conceptually, physically, and it translates in straightforward ways. Like most devout Buddhists at least think that they want to be vegetarian, although they might not carry through with that. And so, because they think, well, animals are sentient beings, and so it's rude to eat other sentient beings. It's unmindful, and it harms yourself as well as others. Although not all Buddhist cultures are strictly vegetarian, but even in those cultures, if a Buddhist was going on a meditation retreat, for example, they would probably be vegetarian for that time. And so be mindful and don't harm yourself and others. And the basic metaphor of Buddhism is that human beings are not evil. So the problem of human existence is not evil and good for Buddhism. It's that nobody's paying attention and you're accidentally harming yourself and each other. And centuries of that makes us utterly mixed up. And so it's really hard to figure out what's appropriate and right and correct because everybody's constantly harming themselves and others. And the real cause of that is a collection of things that are caused by either ignorance, so we don't know what's going on and we think we do, or obsession, which is our cravings and the way we get bound up with our own emotions, or aversions. And aversion and obsession are sort of the inverse of each other. Inversions are all the things we hate. Like if it happens to be green peppers for you, then that will make you avoid them. Or if it's other kind of people or new experiences or lack of order, whatever it happens to be, if you have an aversion, then instead of sort of encountering life in a mindful way or in a non-harming way, you will organize your life to avoid those things which you hate. And then the obsession is the other side of that, is you will also design your life to get you things that you're obsessed with. And by avoiding the things you're afraid of and obsessing about the things that you're sort of emotionally addicted to, you will invariably harm yourself and others, even if by accident, you will. And so the Buddhist idea is you got to get real still, and you got to pay real close attention, and you got to start with don't harm, which includes things like cultivate your empathy, be kind, take joy in the welfare and good fortune of others, and be kind of even-minded, and neutral, or equanimity is the word that's used for that. Sort of be non-attached and sort of don't swing wildly one way or another. And if you do all those things together, then you'll discover what's important and why you should be a certain way.
That's perfect. You're pretty close. Is that good?
That's
a good stopping point?
We're good.
All right. Well, I mean, I could listen to this all day. I'm in his Buddhism class, and it's amazing to me all the time. So, all right, go ahead, Mr. Stark.
Thank you. If you have trouble hearing me, let me know. Put your hand up. A little louder. Okay. Just put your hand to your ear, and I'll do the best I can to speak up. I'm Tom Scar. I'm a poor substitute for our rabbi who sends her regrets, Rabbi Eglin. She's over in Pikeville, Kentucky, doing a similar type of program. Obviously, this is a very important event, and it's important that we engage in it. One of the things I wanted to mention was my understanding that the mission here is this panel is to promote understanding, tolerance through knowledge, and cultural awareness. The importance of that cannot be overstated. This week, the FBI came out with their new statistics on hate crimes, and for 2016. Now, there are always issues about how accurate they are, but the final view is that, if anything, they're understated. But there was an overall increase in hate crimes between 2014 and 2015 by 6%, and from 2015 to 2016 by 5%, especially incidents targeting Muslims and whites. But of the 6,063 incidents involving 7,500 victims in 2016, 60% were race, ethnicity, and ancestry related. And although there's no direct correlation that they found, there's been a similar increase in the number of hate groups that have been identified. In fact, I think overall hate groups went from 892 to 917. And anti-Muslim hate groups increased from 34 in 2015 to 101 in 2016. Religious-based crimes, hate crimes, counts for about 20 or 25% of all of them for the year. Of those, 54% are directed to Jews, 25% directed to Muslims, and then all of the rest kind of combined end up with the balance of those numbers. I find it interesting, and the trend's rather scary. But clearly, blacks are the most frequent victims of hate crime based on race, ethnicity, and ancestry. Jews are the most frequent victims of hate crimes based on religion. And Jews are more than twice as likely to be victims of hate crimes based on religion than Muslims and any other group. This is not a contest anybody wants to win. But it shows how and why this is, I think, so important to us. We started off, and I came in here, I'm Jewish, but after listening to Professor Rubb, I'm thinking, I'm really not, I'm Buddhist.
He has that effect on everyone.
My guess is, as I listen to the others, I'm going to reach that conclusion as well, because the commonalities are so much greater than the differences between the different religious faiths and other philosophies. And what's interesting is with almost every one of them, I think you'll hear, and one of the things we all struggle with, is within each of our different faiths, we have wide range of different beliefs, which what makes this so very, very difficult to talk about the tenets of a particular group. Judaism is an ancient religion, 4,000 years old. The biblical ancient Israelites is what you read about in what 5 books of Moses, what Christians call the Old Testament. But modern Judaism isn't anything like that. And if that's the only knowledge you have about Judaism, this type of program and others are important. The old system was a connection to God through sacrifice, animal sacrifice. That hasn't occurred since 70 AD or CE, depending on what designation you want to use. That's not the system, and that's not how people honor, respect, or worship God in modern Judaism. Over the years, we've talked about these different branches. I don't want to spend much time on that, but to just let you know, we've got Orthodox Judaism, since the early 1800s, Reform Judaism, since the late 1800s, Conservative Judaism. Now we have Reconstructionist, Jewish Renewal, and Humanistic or Secular Judaism. So all of these different branches or denominations of Judaism all have different religious, philosophical, and moral views on different issues. The main tenets then that I can say of the Jewish faith that seems to tie these different branches together is the first idea is, which was identified as the first known attempt to kind of formulate Jewish principles of faith, is Philo in Alexandria, which is God is and rules. God is one. World is created by God. Creation is one. And God's providence rules creation. Does that sound familiar? So a primary tenet of Judaism is that God is one. It was viewed as one of the first strictly monotheistic religions. Shema, which is a prayer that you will find throughout Judaism, from the little plaque on the doors when you go in somebody's house, and other prayers when you see, probably the most frequent prayer that we say at services is the Shema, which is, Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. It's from Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. And it affirms the existence and uniqueness of God. So that is one of the main tenets and one of the most important tenets. The second one that to me is most important is called Tikkun Olam, which is repair the world. That is really one of the consistent obligations throughout Judaism, an obligation to work to make the world a better place. And the kind of the foundational narrative of that goes back to the Exodus from Egypt. In almost every prayer service, and almost that's the Passover holiday that comes once a year, but it's throughout every single prayer service. The idea, the story of the experience of slavery, the punishment of oppression and the oppressors, and redemption and departure. And so understanding that makes sense that this idea of repairing the world is an idea of focusing on social justice, and the idea that if anyone is enslaved anywhere or oppressed anywhere, we are all enslaved, we are all oppressed. And throughout that, Judaism focuses on actions and deeds, not on thoughts or really beliefs. What's important is what you do and how you live. And the third main tenet, and I think because the others all come from it, in terms of how you should live your life, is the idea of how important education and study is. To learn and then follow God's commandments. And that's how you truly worship God in Judaism, which is following the golden rule, whether it's posted positively or negatively. Do unto others what you want them to do unto you, or do not do to others what you would not want them to do unto you. That one of my law professors, actually, when he wasn't teaching law, was our local rabbi in Williamsburg, Virginia. And one day I was in services, not something I did frequently, but I enjoyed listening to this professor. And he talked about it and said, you can explain Judaism with that one phrase. That defines Judaism, and the rest is dicta. And Dict is a legal word, and I was, wait a minute, am I in law school or am I at services? The rest is commentary. But if you learn that and follow that golden rule, you will ultimately be following God's commandments. And in Judaism and in Deuteronomy, we are not talking about 10 commandments, we are talking about 613. Some of them go towards how you live your life, but some of them are what most of us would consider less important, about whether you don't shave after somebody dies. And I didn't start growing the beard for this event. It was no shave November.
Mr. Starr, let's just wrap this one up. We're like 30 seconds. So.
Okay. These are really the basic tenets, and I want to very quickly just go through some things that are the favorite things to me of Judaism, which is Judaism doesn't recruit people, doesn't seek conversions. And it's not that we don't want people to join. If they want to, that's fine, but there really isn't any need, because the Talmud teaches that the righteous of all nations have a place in the world to come. So from our point of view, it's not essential for my well-being or your well-being that you become Jewish. For us, it is Judaism is right for me. That doesn't mean it's right for anybody else, and it doesn't mean that you have to be Jewish or any other particular religion in order to receive God's love or be saved or live a moral and happy life. Many religions have trouble or feel threatened by the idea that there could be many different truths or many different ways to get to truth. Judaism views, again, this is right for me, another religion may be right for you, and we are all seeking, in essence, the same thing and approaching it different ways. My view is that it's unfortunate that people are threatened by that at times, because then they think that they are right and somebody else is wrong, and it becomes important to convert them. And if you are right, and you're the only conveyor of absolute truth, it is amazing how that can be used to justify intolerance and violence in many cases. Judaism focused more on life than death, and as we get into questions, if we can talk about some of those issues, we will.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Starr.
Okay, Christianity. The main tenets. It truly depends upon who you ask. Because Christianity has become such a divided faith. Historically, there has always been disagreement. Just here in Huntington, for example, you have Baptists, Catholics, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists, Church of God Anderson, Church of God Tennessee. And that's just in Huntington. And then all the independent churches. So what do we have in common? What is a commonality between us all? Jesus. And what does that even mean to us? Oh boy, that's a little bit question. I'm going to tell you, I have to do as I teach my Bible classes, I have to do a delicate dance because Huntington being here in this Bible Belt, and everybody enrolls for my class because they've been to Sunday school, and that's going to be an easy A. It's not Sunday school. Because from the very day that Jesus entered the world stage, there was little agreement in understanding who Jesus was. Now, we have denominations that proclaim Jesus only, that Jesus is one. There's no Trinitarian truth, that there is only Jesus. And he provides a way toward an eternal life. Then you have the largest portion of Christianity that would agree together in sharing with Judaism, with monotheism. in Trinitarian theology that we believe that there are three parts of God: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I'll try explaining that in an hour. But from the very day that Jesus entered the world stage, there was not a unanimous agreement about who he was. If you open up your New Testaments, when you look at them, you find the first 4 books are Gospels. You have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it would probably not surprise me if each of you have probably heard why we have 4 Gospels is because, well, they just tell it in their own terms. No, they tell the story in their own understanding of Jesus. And each of the 4 Gospel writers had their own understanding of who Jesus was. The Gospel of Mark, which is the earliest of the Gospels, understood Jesus as that suffering Son of God who came to bring redemption to humanity because we are in a fallen state. Then you get into another 6-day conversation on original sin or complications. So Jesus comes, he's the suffering Son of God, and he comes to bring salvation. Now, we read the Gospel of Matthew. Now, the Gospel of Matthew is what some would refer to as the very Jewish Gospel. Because the same Jewish law that was just spoken of. Jesus never delivers the people of the Mosaic law in the Gospel of Matthew. As a matter of fact, he points out those rascal Pharisees who were just lumping it on everybody else and not living it themselves. Jesus says your righteousness even has to exceed theirs. But Jesus then goes on to explain the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard it said, but I say unto you, not abolishing a law, but given the spirit of the law. How do we live this law out? Then you have the Gospel of Luke, which has a very Gentile feel to it. And Luke presents Jesus, and if you do a close reading of Luke, as much as Luke presents Jesus as Messiah, he also presents him, and it's stated in there explicitly, not implied, that he is one of the misunderstood prophets. Jesus refers to himself as a prophet within the Gospel of Luke. And then you have the Gospel of John. That is far different than the other 3. Matthew, Mark, and Luke present Jesus in a very human form. And the Gospel of John is having none of that. There is this real heavy emphasis upon the deific aspect of Jesus. So even the Gospel writers had their own idea. The one common theme is that Jesus came to provide a way into an eternal salvation with our God. An eternal victory when the evils of the world shall be conquered. A continuation from that Jewish ideology, by the way, that I'm very proud to highlight in Old and New Testament alike, abolishing injustice. So we have that commonality. Now you move out into the early church. Some people thought Jesus was just an apparition. Some people thought he was merely a man. It took up until the 4th century at the Nicene Council when the Emperor Constantine did a good thing. He brought all the church leaders together and he said, you decide who Jesus is. And they argued about one word, ousia. That one word. What is the substance of Jesus? Was he a man? Was he an apparition? And they argued over the substance of Jesus. And out of that we have also the Nicene Creed, which is a longer form of the Apostles' Creed. 30 seconds? Yes. All right. So I'm going to say with my Jewish brother here, social justice. The primary tenet I want you to hear from Christianity. Get away from all confessional statements, all creeds. If we want to know the tenets of Christianity, go to the teachings of Jesus, and you can boil it down to a couple of things. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all of your being, and to love others as yourself. And that's not a sentimental love. I'll end up with Matthew 25 when what Jesus, speaking toward the end time when time was crucial for him in his ministry, he says to the group that's going to enter into the kingdom of heaven, I was hungry, you fed me. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was naked, and you clothed me. Very reminiscent of Micah 6:8. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Christianity in a nutshell.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you. These are two basic tenets of Islam. Islam is not a new religion. Islam has been in existence for more than 1400 years. It's a continuation of God's message. The first revelation, according to Islam, even probably maybe some other revelation before, but the one that is documented is Judaism, then Christianity, then the seal of these religions, according to Islam, is the Islamic religion. The two main scriptures, or the main scripture of the Quran, of Islam is Quran. Then also the second part of the scripture, which is an annotation very much of the Quran, as well as the actions of the Prophet Muhammad, it's called the Hadith. These are the two main guidance for Muslims. The tenets of Islam are very basic, and we share some of these tenets, but performing with these tenets from other religions could be different. And this is what brings us together as a part of the monotheistic religions or monotheistic tree of religions. Islam, the basic thing, you have to believe in one God. The second tenet of Islam, you have to do 5 daily prayers. The third element of Islam, or an article of faith, is to do the fasting of the month of Ramadan. The fourth one is to do charity or almsgiving. And the fifth one is to do the pilgrimage to Mecca. Each of which has its own elements on how to perform it and how to do it and when it could be done and so. But this is not the only thing. Islam also, there is a part of it, it is called the articles of faith. Your faith is not complete and if you just do these things. There are other things that you have to do. One of this is to believe there is only one God worth worshipping. So one of the misconceptions that sometimes I hear that Muslims worship Muhammad. We respect Muhammad highly, we respect the other prophets highly, but we don't worship Muhammad. He is one of those messengers of God who carried the message of God, like God appointed some other messengers before in the past, and he is one of those messengers that were sent to humanity. The second element of the articles of faith of Islam is to believe in the prophet of God. In the Quran, for example, there is a list of 25 prophets named in the Quran by name, but these are not the only ones. The Quran says there could be some others, but these are some of those who were sent to humanities, including again our for Prophet Abraham, for example, who is the father of these 3 monotheistic religions, as well as we are talking about Moses, David, Jacob, Noah, and some others also listed in the Quran. Being a Muslim, you have to believe in those chain of prophethood that sent to humanity. Another element of being a Muslim or a devout Muslim, you have to believe in the books of God. God sent not only the Quran, but before the Quran, there are other revelations. One of them is the Torah, and the other one is the New Testament or the Injil. Being a Muslim, you cannot deny the existence or something written in these books unless if it contradicts with the revelation of the Quran. If it contradicts with it, which is very few of these contradict with the because God, the message of God is universal. It's not just something to send to this or to that. It's just the humanity, and God will not contradict himself. We as a human being, this is why when my colleague said, look, even in a small town in Huntington, how many churches, how many whatever, because we try to analyze and understand the scripture the way we think it is written or it is the way, but that's why you will find so many divisions or maybe branches of some of this religion. So go back to my concept, which is again, the books of God, you have to believe in these books of God. Also, you have to believe also there are angels. God created, as he created us as a human being, he created other creations, which is the angels. These are very much like messengers of God. God assigned them to certain tasks to do, but mainly praising God and helping us, or maybe being with us wherever we go. They guide us to the right way, but we really sometimes we don't see them, but they are there by God's order to protect us and guide us, or so on. Also, another aspect is of Islam is to believe in the day after. This is not the end of life when we die, but the permanent life will come after that. So these are some of the basic elements that has to do with Islam. There is some misconceptions around about Islam, which is conflicting things with Islam, which has to do with the Sharia law. And we normally hear this frequently when election comes and from politicians try to use the Sharia law. Sharia law these are the elements or the instructions in the Quran as well as in the Hadith oriented towards Muslims. They have nothing to do with non-Muslims. Most of these elements in the Quran as well as in the Hadith as for the teaching Muslim how to perform their prayer, how to do the charity, how to be a good person, how to solve this problem. So scaring the nation or scaring people or scaring everybody that they are going to implement Sharia law in the States or in Europe or in some other country, this is totally false. Because the Sharia law has to do with you as a Muslim, how to perform your religion and how to do it the way it should be done. Also, there are so many misconceptions about Islam. One of them, for example, about women in Islam. Women have the same right as men. There is no such difference. However, there are sometimes you saw maybe cultural or regional or geographical or something things that has to do with discrimination between men and women. Men and women have the same right exactly as stated in the Quran. But again, when we see some countries, for example, they don't send children, women or their daughters to school, like what happened in Afghanistan, for example, they will say Islam is stopping them from singing. Totally, the first thing, or in fact, I will quote a saying of the Prophet Muhammad. He says, "Man kanat," I'll say it in Arabic and translated in English. "Man kanat lahu ibnatun fa'allamha wa ahsanat ta'limaha wa addabaha fa'ahsanat adibaha kanat lahu sitra min an-nar." Which means, and he emphasized over here in girls, not in boys, to encourage people to again to send their children to school. If you have a daughter and you took care of her the best way it should be, and you try to teach her or send her to school, it will be a protection to you from the hell after in the day of judgment. So people would look for that good ending, which is again a protection or a shield or a help somebody at the time when there is no help except the help of God. So that is one basic thing that shows that men and women are equal. If we go to the election system, for example, from the first day Islam gave the women the right to elect and to run for offices or to run for political positions or whatever. But if we see it practically right now, if some countries try to stop women from doing this could be politics, could be cultural thing, could be something else, or could be individuals who is hard-headed and don't like women, for example, and they try to issue things that has to do against women or from that nature.
You're pretty close. Yeah.
Okay. The last aspect, and I will stop after that because I would like for you to ask questions. I'll be more than willing to answer these questions. It's what we brought with my colleagues over here about the social justice in Islam. Islam is a universal religion. It was not sent just to the people in Arabia or people in this region or in that region. It is open for everybody, which is unlike Judaism, like just for a certain group, or there is no one is, or maybe we don't accept somebody to come to Islam. It's open for everybody who would like to to follow the guidance of God. But the social justice message in Quran, in Islam, is clear, and it was clarified in the Quran as well as in the Hadith, which is the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. I will cite two aspects of this, one from the Quran, and I will say it in Arabic, and I'll give you the translation, and also I will give you an element of the Hadith. One of the verses in the Quran that clarify the social justice of message of Islam. There are so many of them, but this is just an example for the sake of this presentation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, after saying in the name of God, Ya ayyuha an-nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qabaila lita'arafu inna akramakum 'inda Allahi atqakum. This is one of the verses in the Quran, which means, O human being, we created you from male and female, and we made you nations and the tribes, to know one another, to work with one another, to help one another, to care about one another. The best among you is not the rich, or from this tribe, or from that tribe, or this color, or that color. The best among you is the one who is close to God, who loves God and loves others. That is one of the verses, and there are so many of them in the Quran. Also, there is another speech of the Prophet Muhammad. As I said, if you remember earlier, I said the two basic sources for Islamic religion are the Quran and the Hadith. I am citing something from the Hadith, Prophet Muhammad, and this is his from a very well-known speech of the Prophet Muhammad, which has to do, it was done during the farewell pilgrimage for him. It is when he did his last pilgrimage to Mecca, and it's called the farewell speech of Prophet Muhammad. The meaning of that speech, he said, all mankind are from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, and a non-Arab has no superiority over an Arab. Also, white has no superiority over a black, nor a black has superiority over a white, except by piety. So that is a very clear message from the Prophet that everybody is equal. There is no one is better than another except what they do good or what they contribute to themselves, to the society, to the community, to the nation, to everybody. That is basically Islam in a nutshell, and I'll be more than willing to explain whatever question comes from you. And I would like to thank, for example, I forgot to do it at the beginning, to thank Carrie and her team for putting this together. It was so nice of you to do it.
I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm not as loud usually. But, so I'm doing a really quick introduction to the Baha'i faith. It's going to be really broad, and there's a lot that I probably won't have time to go into, so feel free to ask questions. But in general, what is the Baha'i faith? It's a world religion whose purpose is to unite all the peoples, all the races, all the world in one universal cause and one common faith. To put it simply, Baha'is believe in the oneness of God, the oneness of humanity, and the oneness of religion. The Baha'i faith was founded by Baha'u'llah, whose title literally translates to glory of God. And Baha'is believe that he's the most recent manifestation of God for this day and age. He was born in 1817 in Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, And he declared his prophethood on April 21st, 1863 in what is now Baghdad. And Baha'is actually right now are celebrating the 200th anniversary of his birth, and that was celebrated in October. Some of the principles that Baha'u'llah revealed and brought down to mankind, I thought I'd just give you kind of the main things that Baha'is believe in. The first one is that all humankind is one. The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens. That's one of the quotes from Baha'u'llah. Also, we believe that all religions are truly one, and the concept that we refer to is progressive revelation. So throughout history, God has sent to humanity a series of divine educators, or prophets of God, manifestations of God, and each of their teachings have provided the basis for human life, for human advancement, for civilization advancement. And these manifestations have included Abraham, Krishna, Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad. And Baha'is believe that Baha'u'llah is the latest of these messengers and has kind of the message most appropriate to this day. He also talked about the elimination of all forms of prejudice, and the quote that I have is very similar to the one you read. He says, "O children of men, know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other." He also brought down the principle that science and religion should actually be in harmony with one another and not be contradicting each other. He says religion without science is superstition, and science without religion is materialism. He talked about the elimination in the extremes of wealth and poverty, the equality of men and women, the need for universal education, and the independent investigation of the truth. And that principle is why you have a medical student and not a clergy person talking to you, because Baha'u'llah said that the time for clergy has passed and that we're all in charge of our own spiritual advancement at this point. Some of the other central figures to the Baha'i faith, we have the Bab, whose title translates to the gate, and he was the forerunner of Baha'u'llah and kind of prepared the people for his coming and his message. There's Abdul Baha, whose title translates to the servant of God, and the faith and the administration of the faith after Baha'u'llah's passing was put kind of in his hands. And Baha'is also look to him as the perfect example of what a human being can achieve, because he wasn't divine, he wasn't a prophet of God, but he is kind of like the epitome of all that we try to achieve. And then after him, there was Shoghi Effendi, who was appointed as the guardian of the faith. And Shoghi Effendi also was a human, and he is responsible for the administrative order of the Baha'i faith in the world as it is today. So what is that? We have kind of three levels of things. We have the international governing body of the Baha'is, which is called the Universal House of Justice. This is a body of 9 elected members who serve as the international authoritative body for the Baha'is of the whole world. They send out messages, guidance, and most importantly, plans of how to achieve the unity that the Baha'i faith is meant to achieve. We also have national spiritual assemblies in each country. They're kind of just responsible for the country they live in and administering the needs of the faith there. And on the smallest level, we have local spiritual assemblies, which are also 9 members, democratically elected, in each location where there are 9 Baha'is. There is not one in Huntington yet, so there's not 9 of us, but in many places in the U.S. and in the rest of the world, there are these assemblies of people that administer to the needs of the community, the Baha'i community. Everyone kind of ended talking about social justice, which is great because that's kind of what I also wanted to end talking about. The entire purpose of the Baha'i faith is to unify the world. Regardless of religion, class, creed, whatever it is, we're here to unite. And so the Universal House of Justice on the international level provides us plans to how to make that lofty goal of unity into concrete steps. And so currently, Baha'is all over the world, in this country, and even in Huntington, are involved in trying to build communities from a grassroots level. And we have 3 main ways that we try to do this. The first is to host devotional gatherings, to have interfaith meetings of people saying prayers together to increase the spiritual character and capacity of a neighborhood, a town, a street, anything. We also do children's classes for kids aged about 3 to 11, and we talk about virtues like love, justice, compassion, honesty, to work on kids' spiritual character. And then we also have junior youth groups for junior youth, which we identify as ages 11 to 15. And in those sessions, junior youth work with what's known as an animator to develop both spiritual and intellectual excellence. And we teach them, or we work with them to have them understand kind of how they can take charge of their own development and the development of their community, mostly through service. And service is a big part of the Baha'i faith. you asked Dr. Hoof a question in the beginning, what is a human being, and why should we get out of bed in the morning? So I was thinking what that means to a Baha'i. I think Baha'is believe that a human being is really someone created in the image of God with the potential to perfect all the qualities that we see in God: love, justice, mercy, truthfulness, humility, all of these things. And we get out of bed in the morning to serve humanity, because serving humanity not only creates the kingdom of God on earth, which has been talked about in multiple religions, but also has the effect of purifying your own soul and preparing you for the next world. So that's in a nutshell, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
You get the award for staying within your 5 minutes. Only woman on the panel.
Can I add a little tiny thing right
Please,
there?
please.
The Department of Religious Studies and the Baha'i folks locally, we've been trying to get the right time. I wanted to do it this week, actually. So watch for advertising for 2 films. They're going to be shown on campus. We're going to try to still get one in this semester right after Thanksgiving break, and then do one next semester as well. We may end up having to do both of them next semester, but sort of watch for posters. If you see Baha'i something film, then show up to this room and fill it up, because they're both excellent, really excellent films, and we just haven't succeeded with all the coordination yet. So,
Okay, awesome. I'll be there.
Okay. Hi, I'm Marty Walbach. Can people hear me back in the back? Yeah. Okay. I'm here kind of representing 2 spiritual paths. I'll try to condense it all into a 5-minute thing.
Yeah.
If that's
All right, we're past that.
The first one is Unitarian Universalism. Unitarian Universalism emerged out of Christianity. The idea of Unitarianism as opposed to Trinitarianism, they didn't believe in Trinity. And Universalism was the idea that everybody will eventually make it into heaven. You're not going to have a heaven. But the Unitarian Universalists, by the time they came together in the 1950s, we started incorporating so many other different types of beliefs that about the best thing you can say for us is that we're as ecumenical of a religious community as you can get. We have Christians in our community, we have Jewish people in our community, Buddhists, Hindus. We have agnostics in our community. We have atheists in our community, people who don't believe in any kind of spirituality at all, as well as the spiritualists, especially those people who we in the scientific community call the SBNR, spiritual but not religious people. Probably the best thing for me to do to really describe Unitarian Universalism as it's practiced today is to talk about the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. The first is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The second is justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. The third is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. The fourth is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The fifth is the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. The sixth is the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And the seventh is respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Now, the social justice, of course, as we've been hearing, is very much a part of Unitarian Universalism. We tend to oppose many people who repress others. The local congregation in particular has as one of our special things that we're very proud of, that we actually had a cross burned on our lawn of our church. And then I think we're the only congregation probably in the country that had the KKK call up and apologize for doing it because they thought we were not Unitarian Universalists, they thought we were the Unification Church. So,
oh my goodness.
So we had a cross burned and then an apology from the KKK. So. The last tenet, though, brings me to the second group that I want to talk about, and that's respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. That was added fairly recently to the tenets of Unitarian Universalism in order to incorporate a spiritual community that had grown up separately, but by the time of the 1980s, especially in the latter part of the 1980s, decided to walk together with Unitarianism. There's a group of which I was a part back in the latter part of the 1980s called the Covenant of the Unitarian Universalist Pagans. And that is my second hat. And for that, I'm going to wear my separate hat. This is my crazy hippie hat for talking about Neopaganism. Neopaganism is a religious community. It is kind of a confederation of many different religions, many different separate religions. It includes the witchcraft community, Wicca. It includes people who do ceremonial magic, and by ceremonial magic, I mean, basically studying the things that you would see coming out of Hogwarts. Okay. And there actually is an online university called Grey School, which teaches about magic. Okay. Also, Thelema, which is the followers of Aleister Crowley. There is also the Reconstructionist religions, people who bring back Greco-Roman religions, people who bring back the Druid religions, people who bring back Egyptian religions, and then some of the more recent religions like Voodoo and many of the shamanic paths. We are very much open to many of these different groups. It's like I say, it's a kind of a confederation. It really emerged, many people say that there's a connection between Neopaganism as it's practiced today and the paganism that was practiced prior to Christianity. I have to call BS on that because I don't believe that the practices that they had back then really survived the burning times when people were slaughtered for having their religious practices. What we do now is very much a postmodern religion. And it emerged really and built its movement out of, frankly, the 1960s counterculture. There was a lot of activity prior to that, especially from England with the witchcraft movement. But it merged with the ceremonialists and really took off during the 1960s. And then by the 1970s, it incorporated feminism and feminist spirituality. It incorporated the LGBTQ community and their spirituality. It incorporated eco-spirituality. It incorporated everything from science fiction and fantasy. People pulled together sets of beliefs and more or less created an entire religious community out of it. There are many, many beliefs that are set up. I just recently did a study for the CUPS group, the Covenant of the Unitarian Universalist Pagans, to see what kinds of things people believed. One statement that many people agreed with is that the world is full of gods and spirits and we can interact with them. Another is that the earth is the body of the goddess. Another is that there are many goddesses and gods and they are individual beings with their own thoughts, goals, and areas of responsibility. Another is the ancient stories about gods and goddesses are very meaningful to me. Another is I know people whose claims of direct experience of spirit are believable, and that religious practice is about facilitating and encouraging mystical experiences. And that probably more than anything really is one of the most important things that we bring in Neopaganism. People come to Neopaganism to actually commune with spirit. We believe in many people in Neopaganism believe that spirits exist out there, angels and other types of spirits. Many religions have incorporated them as divas and such. But that there are spirits of the world, that the world is alive spiritually, and that we can communicate and work with it. In fact, many people, I think, within Neopaganism believe in what we call immanence. The immanence of spirituality inside of everything, that you don't transcend the world to get to spirit. Other parts of American Neopaganism is that we worship gods and goddesses. Okay? Other aspects of it is a focus on will. We also have a very strong statement, except that you do harm to others, do your will. Okay? as a pagan, will identify myself as a tree-hugging dirt worshiper, and that is, I think, most of the time that I have here. But I can speak both for Unitarian Universalism and also for paganism, and I'll put my hat on when I do so.
Okay, all right. We'll know the difference. Thank you, Dr.
So I was just writing down some of the words that I've heard the last 11 years.
Yeah.
But mindfulness, social justice. In fact, lots of people say social justice. Equality, love, tolerance, serving humanity. I have to say, I can get behind all of those religions if that's what it's about. So that's very heartening about this meeting that we're having. I think the best introduction I can give is a little bit of personal background about myself. Maybe you can tell, maybe you can't. My family's originally from West Virginia, from Logan, and I grew up in Kentucky. And I grew up in a fundamentalist, evangelical, Southern Baptist household. And I had this personal curse during that time of being very interested in animals and dinosaurs. And in that background, my parents weren't scientists. When you go and ask questions about, why are there no bears in Africa? Why were there Triceratops was only at the end of the Cretaceous, or the Cretaceous and not in the Triassic? I had all these questions about things, and the only answers I ever got had something to do with Noah's Ark. So I found those, even at an early age, very unsatisfying for someone with that kind of curiosity. And as it developed, I came to learn that evolution answered these questions. And as I learned more about evolution, I learned more about science. And science as an enterprise is predicated, it's a secular enterprise. It's the operation of doing science, even though people of lots of different faiths or none at all can do science. The operation of doing science isn't one that makes appeals to divine agency. So that led me to sort of broader, I'm a scientist, so I'm mostly engaged in that world, but that led me to some broader investigations of secularism. So if you think of secularism as sort of reliant on our capacity for reason, and if you think of science as our ability to gather empirical evidence to test our ideas, philosophy is our approach to where we use reason alone to test those ideas, and then theological or religious aspects appeal to some aspect of dogma, or I might be more charitable than to call it dogma, but religious prescriptions or beliefs and things like that. Well, secularism relies on science and philosophy to come to conclusions above appeals to religious tradition. Secularism is required for science. We really can't operate science in the context of any particular religious faith. And we've tried that before in the history of societies. And that's not to say that some religious traditions haven't fostered science. They have. But it can only take things so far, because usually when people start to investigate the natural world, they come to conclusions that run afoul of some belief. Martin Luther, for instance, said that Copernicus was a fool for believing that the sun was at the center of the solar system. So, these are areas where, in the history of science, we've never really had a significant scientific advance by abandoning a natural explanation that works for a supernatural one. Nowhere in the history of science has that happened. So, this to me has been a very powerful thing. And I've come to, I'm not an atheist. I don't believe in a personal God necessarily, but I consider myself more of an agnostic, and maybe on my good days, maybe a little closer to some of my colleagues here. It just depends. And then also, secularism not only is the sort of stage in which scientific investigation takes place, secularism, I think, is very important for permitting a pluralistic society where all of these faiths can coexist in the same space. So if we go back to one of my favorite of the founders is Jefferson. And not only because he really liked science, he started the Lewis and Clark investigations of North America. And this was a time when our political leaders would write letters, detailed letters to each other about nature and on their property, things like that. What species they would find and what species they thought were out in the West and things like that. You can imagine how far that is from our political leaders today. But Jefferson, being one of my favorite of the founders, he said, whether you believe, and I'll paraphrase, whether you believe in 20 gods or one or none, it neither breaks my leg or picks my pocket. And that's sort of how I feel. And that attitude sort of created this experiment that we have, that's the United States, where because we have a secular government, it allows for this plurality of religions to exist in the same space. So, those are my thoughts on secularism. And I don't want to take up too much time. I want to keep it going so we can start that question.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Maybe you get the only award for being Andrew. That's wonderful. Let's see here. I think I have the only microphone now. Maybe they can hear me. You guys can hear me, right? I've got a microphone for questions, and I can come to you if anyone has a question that they'd like to ask for one of the panelists. Just raise your hand, and this is the only time you're going to have this many super smart people sitting together. Yeah, do this so that everyone can hear.
It's not so much a question. I just wanted to say thank you. This kind of group gives me hope. This is the sort of thing I think we have to be doing at Marshall. That's it.
Absolutely. I agree. We can all applaud that.
This is, a lot of religions or a lot of, even atheists struggle with the idea of an afterlife. And I wanted to kind of know more of what each religion or ideology has to say about, is there an afterlife? What is the afterlife like? What do you prepare for it if there is or isn't one? So I think that'd be something a lot of people might like to hear.
It's like the question of the hour. That's like my burning question, to know the difference. And that would be an answer for everyone, I think.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear from each of us?
Yeah.
Please.
I'd like to, yeah.
Okay. The Buddhist answer first, because it's going to be different from everybody else's, except maybe the secularists. And the Buddhist answer to that is, that question is part of the problem, not part of the solution. The Hindu answer to that question is that the universe is a phenomenon that operates like spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, like a cycle of seasons, but takes millions or billions of years to do that. And so during that time, sentient beings, which is more broadly construed than what we think of as sentient being, because a rock can be sentient in, the Himalayas. In Nepal, you can find all kinds of rocks that have personalities as far as people are concerned, or rivers. So not even objects, a phenomenon. And so the Hindu answer is, that's a tough question. But you get billions of years to figure it out. And eventually you'll figure out that you didn't need to figure it out because you were already God in the first place.
Well, I have a question for that. Through Buddhism, though, since that's the problem, the question is the problem, is there something you can explain maybe with like samsara that maybe might kind of, not necessarily afterlife,
okay.
but...
So the Buddhist response there, and this is from the historical Buddha 2,500 years ago, is that he told this story when asked that question. If you're sitting around at home and you smell smoke, you don't scratch your head and say, man, I wonder why we build houses out of combustible material. Maybe I should call the contractor. And maybe I should know his name, and I should wonder how it all started that we decided we would build out of combustible material, because we could live in caves. If you do that, you will die and the house will burn down and you'll be dead. And so the Buddhist answer to that is, if you try to answer questions that you can't answer, you will cause yourself and others to suffer, and you will create massive science fiction fantasies. I quote the Buddha.
You have to know his class is interesting just from those answers. Mr. Scar.
Again, the answer actually very similar. In Judaism, very Orthodox Judaism, they do believe in an afterlife. They do believe in a Messiah who has not yet come, but will come. They don't believe in hell, but believe in purgatory for those that need purification for a limited number of years. That's Orthodox. But most Judaism, Jews do not necessarily believe in an afterlife at all. But either way, the idea is conservative Judaism, Reform Judaism, we don't focus on it. There's no point. First of all, we can't know the answer. Maybe we'll find out some point in time. But our focus should be on this life. And a significant difference in some other religions is that we do not believe that you need either a threat of punishment or a prospect of reward in an afterlife in order to be a good person and live a good moral life. And the idea is focus on today and how you live, and you can, if you live well, you'll be close to God in this life. If you don't live well, you will be punished in this life. And so we don't think about and really don't ask the question about the afterlife, and for the reason you said, that you can't know the answer to that.
That's interesting because I was raised Baptist, and so it's completely different than everything I've ever heard, and so I'm trying to,
Teacher.
Yes, you in the corner.
Okay. And of course, that's where the question does come from. And so that's why some other religions really have to, like you're playing basketball, and you got to get your elbows out and say, no, we don't have to answer that question, because that's your question. It's not our question. And so, anyway, that's
good. Well, technically it's Maggie's question. I'm just going to go ahead and put this on her. I just said I wanted to hear the answer. I'm here for the comments. That's what I said. Go ahead, Dr. Bailey.
Within Christianity, there are, again, multiple points of view, but probably the most prominent shared belief amongst the branches is that there will come a day when God will decide to shift life as we know it to a perfect time, a time of cleansing. The whole end times left behind kind of thing. There's all kinds of different ways that people have envisioned it by appropriating Hebrew scripture and misinterpreting it to draw these great images. But ultimately, within my denomination, one of the ways that we describe it is the mystery of God. We know that it's going to be great. We get to spend an eternity with Him. But as far as being able to tell you what it looks like, what it smells like, or any of those things, we are content with the mystery of God and what that being eternally in His presence will look like. So,
That sounds about right. Dr. Cotter?
Well, in Islam, it is very clear, it is one of the basic foundation of the Islamic religion to believe in the day after. our life over here is a gateway to the day after. So in the day after, we all, despite our previous religious backgrounds, we will stand in front of God. And even if you are a Muslim, which is unlike, for example, Christianity, if you believe in Jesus Christ and the blood of Jesus Christ will entitle you, for example, to go to heaven or whatever. This is even if you are a devout Muslim, because you don't know that this is going, you hope to go to that destination which is going to heaven. So there is hell and there is heaven. And based on your work in this life, and if you did good and believed in God the way you should believe, should be believed, and did what you're supposed to do, then should entitle you to heaven. On the other hand, if you did the other way, or did not believe in God, or did something wrong, hurt a human being, killed somebody, was stealing, was doing something wrong in this life, wasn't what God ordered us to be as good a human being, then your destination will be the hellfire, despite the fact that if you are a Muslim or non-Muslim. So everybody will be questioned in the day after, and based on their deeds, if they were alive, they will again designate a destination. So it is one of the major things in Islam is to believe on that day.
Okay, all right.
Much like what everyone else shared, Baha'is, of course, we don't know what's in the afterlife. We do believe that the soul goes on after the body perishes. I just want to share one small quote. To consider that after the death of the body, the spirit perishes is like imagining that a bird in a cage will be destroyed if the cage is broken, though the bird has nothing to fear from the destruction of the cage. Our body is like the cage and the spirit is like the bird. If the cage becomes broken, the bird will continue and exist. Its feelings will be even more powerful, its perceptions greater, and its happiness increased. So Baha'is really do believe that we are souls having a human experience, but also that the reason we're having a human experience is to develop the qualities and virtues that we need for the next life, because the soul will continue to progress until it reaches the presence of God, which is a forever long journey. So a lot of times that's equated or made similar to like a baby in the womb, where you're developing your limbs, your arms, your lungs, some of which you're using when you're in the womb, but some of which you're not, which you'll need in the next world or when you're born. Mm-hmm. So we're here to serve, and through service we acquire virtue, so we have our spiritual arms and legs for the next world.
Okay, I got two answers. One from the Unitarian Universalists.
Without the hat.
I don't know. Good for today. Don't worry about next one. Now, Vegas. Well, I don't know. But I would say, if you really squeezed most of the pagans, they would say that they believe in some form of incarnation. That we believe that we are spirits inhabiting a body, and that the spirit does not die. That some form of consciousness passes on to other lifetimes.
All right, hat off.
I would say the secular view is actually a little like some of the more, the religious traditions that we've heard here. Is that, in an agnostic view, like, you don't know. I mean, as far as do we have an immaterial soul or spirit, that's not a question that a scientific approach can address. So science has to be kind of agnostic on that point. So asking whether or not the soul continues after death is sort of a question that is not for science. I mean, I incidentally had this discussion with my 12-year-old son about an afterlife, and I gave kind of I've always heard that like the favorite book in the Bible for an atheist is Ecclesiastes, right? And I really love it.
Why is it? Tell us. I don't know.
It's not just good Birds lyrics, remember, but it says some really interesting things. It sort of says the same things like we've heard here, is that this life is what you're given, and you should make the most of it. And because the dead know nothing, and that's it. So you should consider this life a gift and make the most of it. And I told my son the things that live on after you might not be your spirit, but might be your children or your students or the people you helped as a physician, or the work you did. Ecclesiastes 2 talks about doing good work and being with your family. So those things for a secular person, I think, are the things that will live on. about you are the things you leave behind. And a sort of hell for a secular person is to leave behind not so good things. You know, so if someone like Adolf Hitler hasn't left behind too much else that we look at today as a good legacy to live on. So, you know, the things you leave behind, I think, are important. The things you do in this life are important, what we think about.
Well, I'm thankful that everyone's message seems to have that same legacy and social justice and love and kindness, because that's the whole meaning of this panel, was to promote love and kindness throughout our audience, and then for you to continue on by taking those feelings and those thoughts and this knowledge to go out to the public and your interactions with your family over Thanksgiving, over Christmas break, and when you come back in the spring with other students that might look different than you, might dress different than you. We can see that from one end of the spectrum to the other that there are so many commonalities, that you have those commonalities with those same students, those same professors. Yeah. You can't hear me? Wait. Oh, the beards, yes, the beards.
With one exception.
Except our beautiful Sharon. She doesn't have a beard, and thank goodness. So all the beards on the panel, yeah, they all have that in common. But I mean, it took me almost 13 minutes to get through your credentials. Obviously, you're well qualified, and you deserve your weight in gold. You're speaking for free, except for the small gifts in those purple bags. You're worth so much more than that. Should we give them a round of applause? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if there's
I would like to say that a gathering like this has not always been possible. Prior to World War II, we couldn't sit side by side. It's only been since the 60s that there has really been a pro-Israel movement within Christianity. With my brother here, with the animosities that go on in the world, and the misrepresentations that are spread, as you were clarifying initially. You know, there is branches within Christianity where we can't come together like this, but it is awesome to be here in the Bible Belt and to be able to sit amongst our peers and to be able to see and share about so much we have in common. The world knows too much hate, and if anything is going good in this century, is some eye-opening on these issues. So I thank my peers for sharing.
I couldn't have said it better. Is there anyone else that has anything to add that maybe you didn't get to?
I think as I'm sitting here and hearing all these wonderful things, that, you know, I think maybe I should be more religious now.
Well, you got the beard.
I think several of them are pretty happy that you just said that.
Really walk away.
But you know, the quarrel I've had with religion has been with the fundamentalist branches of religion, and
Me too.
And and it's important to note that every branch of religion that we've had, even Buddhists have a fundamentalist branch that aren't the sort of peaceful, you know, stereotype you might have heard of a Buddhist. And so I think that within each of our traditions, and even within the secular tradition of very sort of militant atheism that goes on, I think each one of us should work hard within our own tradition against that fundamentalist expression of what we're trying to say. I think that's important.
Amen. I preach it every Sunday.
That's one of the things I was going to say.
I said ditto.
No, I'm glad you said it. See, how many of you know where Myanmar is?
Burma.
How many of you know what has been going on there for a while?
Yeah.
The bad guys in that story are Buddhists, supposedly. I mean, and who are the good guys? Who are the persecuted people in that story?
Muslims.
Muslims. Okay, so every religious tradition so thoughtfully and communicatively and decently and sweetly represented here today has some members that are jerks. And sometimes they're the majority in the neighborhood.
Or if they're not the majority, sometimes they're the loudest.
Or they may be the
Yeah.
bossiest or the loudest. And so that's part of why this conversation has to be out loud. Because those other folks are having it out loud and are demanding a certain amount of spotlight. And so that's the one thing, is that you need to speak out when you see human bad behavior in your own community or others. And this is one way to do that. The other one is two things y'all said. I wanted to change my answer. I wanted to make it a specific, instead of a general Hindu answer, I want to make it a specific Hindu answer because I wanted to give the goddesses a little bit of love. And that is.
Wondered where they were.
Ain't you a married man?
All women are incarnations of the goddess. So I'm worshiping when I'm. The Shakta traditions of India. I lived in the mountains of India and Nepal for some years of my life, and I studied the goddess traditions there very closely for a considerable amount of time. And one of my favorite metaphors I've ever encountered in my life is the spiritual idea of that our life as human beings is that we are zygotes. We're embryos in the womb of the goddess, and whatever is next is our birthday. That's when we're actually born. So right now, you live and breathe and know your being in mommy.
Mommy.
And someday you get to be born, and then you'll know the answer to that other question.
So you have to wait, Maggie. Good job. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we got one more.
Do you have does someone else have it? Okay, I'll be up here in just a second. No, mine's not. Oh, okay. Hold on. I'm coming. It's like the price is right. Only
I love it.
I'm
Yeah.
coming up here. Of course. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no.
I was wondering what all of your opinions are on the concept of the end of times. So whether you believe it, don't.
Can you hear?
End of time.
Concept on the
End
end
time.
of time. She'd like an answer from everyone, if you don't mind.
Well, I can answer real quick. The sun is a star, and stars have a certain evolution that they go through. Someday our particular star will expand out, and as it expands out, it will burn away our atmosphere. And without our atmosphere, we will be radiated to death and burned to a cinder, and it'll all be over. But that's not going to happen for many millions of years. So that's my scientific view on the end.
Unitarian Universalism and paganism do not believe in end time. We believe in cycles, that life cycles, that spirituality cycles. I mean, we're a religion that was basically, because of the Inquisition, was slaughtered. And we resurrected. And so we believe in cycles. Of course, this whole thing about the sun, that's something we think about too. Hopefully we'll be off on other planets when that happens.
From a Baha'i perspective, I can't say the end of times is something that we have a whole lot of writings on. God has a covenant with human beings in the Baha'i worldview that he will always have guidance for us, and he will never leave us without someone to guide us, without a prophet. I don't take that to mean that we're always going to be in this form exactly forever and always, but other than that, there's not too much that I can speak on for the end of times.
In Islam, there is signs for end of time. And there is an end of time too. And that end of time, it's not in the hand of a human being. This is in the hand of God. It could be tomorrow, it could be after 1 million years, we really don't know. But there is a time which is be an end of time, and the one who knows about it, according to Islam, is God.
Within Christianity, some terms you might be familiar with. Millennialist, amillennialist, postmillennialist, premillennialist. We're real unified. The best answer is across the spectrum of Christianity, we do believe there will be a day when Christ redeems the earth. But I am convinced that when Jesus said that no man knows the day or the hour, and neither does the Son himself, who am I to put myself above Jesus and say I know something more than he? In this Methodist faith, there's a lot of speculation, but we're content with our view. We'll figure it out when we get there. Just be right today. Yeah.
Personally, I believe, I guess, with the scientific view, and it doesn't bother me, and I don't lose a lot of sleep over it. But Judaism is not that different than Christianity and Islam in terms of the orthodox conservative view of either a day of judgment or a Messiah coming and a different world thereafter.
Some of our oldest stories of Hinduism, so really old stories, say the world or the cosmos are different dice throws. And so, according to that theory, we're in the fourth collection of eons. And it depends on who you ask, but these are millions or billions of years. And so according to that tradition within Hinduism, the universe kicks off and it's awesome, and then it just sortily runs down like my old truck used, after several years. And more things break, and people are meaner, and it gets gloomier, and then it falls apart and disintegrates. And then there's an empty time in between, and then it all starts again, and it goes on for eon. And so for them, it does begin and it does end, but that's not the end.
That's what I believe.
And then the Buddhists, you really have to go from culture to culture and look at the different kinds of Buddhism, because there are definitely some eschatological Buddhist thought in China, Korea, Japan, Mongolia, and the sort of East Asian forms of Buddhism. But you would have to be in a place and time and ask an actual Buddhist. A lot of the Buddhists I know are scientifically minded, so they'd say it's like, well, it's actually like science. We're not worried about that. We're worried about why to get out of bed. Why to get out of bed in the morning. That's the stuff we're worried about. Not that we trust science for those other kinds of stories.
So mine's a bit more selfish, I guess. So I just have for one person on Baha'i. You mentioned like groups of 9 for your councils.
Yeah.
I'm interested into like symbolism, that sort of stuff. So like, why is it a group of 9? And like, why can't you have your own council here, even though there's not a group of 9?
9 is a holy number in the Baha'i faith. I'm definitely not an expert on theology or why that number carries significance. Baha'u'llah was the 9th prophet. And the groups of 9, to be honest, that's just how many they have to be a governing body. We're becoming a registered group here in Huntington. We're just not enough people to formally call ourselves a local spiritual assembly. Those groups of 9 are usually democratically elected too. Just to kind of expand on your question, no one's allowed to campaign. No one's allowed to say that they want to be on an LSA. They're just kind of formed when you have 9 Baha'is. There's definitely a lot of symbolism and theology behind that. I'm just probably not the best person to answer it, to be quite honest with you.
Well, I have a question then off of that. How many are there here so far?
In Huntington?
Yes.
There's 5 of us.
5? Oh, okay, so just 4 more.
There's
I'm ready for
yeah.
it.
There's an LSA in Charleston, and in other bigger cities, in DC and LA, there's thousands upon thousands of Baha'is. We're just a little bit smaller here. It's fine.
Anyone else?
don't think I need the microphone, but what I wanted to say was, my job at this point is to give Carrie a grade in her capstone. And I would like to say that I'd like to ask for a round of applause for Carrie. I think she's done
Well, then I have to ask for a round of applause for Kim and Maggie and Dina because they're the ones that got me into this. This isn't even something that I would have approached, not even in my wildest dreams. So, I mean, this makes me so happy. This makes me so happy. I'm so excited to have gotten to know most of you. I mean, really, truly, Dr. Roof was the only one I'd met in person until today, except for that one time that we sat on the same aisle and you asked that question that couldn't get answered. That one time, in another time in place. Well, actually in this row right here, but yeah, no, that was really exciting. So thank you, but please give Dina and Maggie and Kim another round of applause. Like, they worked really, really hard. Awesome, thank you. Yes, thank you all for being here the Thursday before Thanksgiving. You're awesome. All right.
Good job, Carrie.
Thanks, sweetie. Thanks for coming on. And hugs. Thank you so much. You're awesome.